I've got this really funny story, gross but funny story. And it's just to illustrate the stuff that we're doing inside this membership and how you, all the visualization and then the inner work and the beliefs and things like that we're doing, and why, like you're saying things like, oh, well, this seems to be changing really quickly. This seems to be, I'm not really doing anything, but I am just shifting this thought. I've noticed I'm just shifting this thought and this feeling, and shit's sort of coming my way. Like it's changing on the outside. And I don't feel like it's really hard. And that's why I want to work with you guys this way. That's why I designed this membership this way as well. And so a couple of funny stories, and just to illustrate exactly what we're talking about how important your imagination is and how your beliefs and everything like that shape everything, right? And so the kids had a friend over and their mum came and picked them up. And I was talking about a situation where I had heard about a certain farmer, it's a bit gross, but a certain farmer incubating eggs. So putting eggs in an incubator that, and they'd put it under a light to see if they were sort of developing a baby inside them, to see if they were fertilized, because not all the eggs were fertilized. And if they were fertilized, they'd keep them in there. But if they weren't, they'd left them in that heat for a week. And if they couldn't see any change, they would sell them as eating eggs. Right? Just knock that off. And anyone who's eaten a rotten egg or an egg that's sort of been under incubation for a week, you just don't want to go there. Anyway, I was telling this story. Just saying that, the woman was like bleh, bleh, dry reaching, and she's like bleh, and she was trying to get in the car. Bleh. It went on for like 20 minutes, and we were both laughing our heads off. So real and relevant, but both laughing our heads off. And then she'd go to talk about something else, and she'd think about the eggs. It was just dry reaching everywhere, and we were cracking up, laughing our heads off. But I was like, "Look how powerful the subconscious is." She goes, "I've got an egg out of the chickens before, and it's the most revolting thing." So she's had this experience, or even if she hasn't had the experience, she can imagine something, and it's having a full-on physiological effect for her, right? As it does for a lot of people, because it's really intense for them, right? And so some people don't feel like that. It's not as intense for them, but we can still be like, ooh, and start to feel a bit queasy in the tummy, right? I also remember quite a few years ago now, my kids, we had chocolate, and they were sculpting it, and they sculpted it and painted it with different colors and things that we had at the time. They were doing some cupcake art or something. Anyway, they were getting crazy and silly with it. And maybe it was a cupcake, I don't know, but it was edible, put it that way. It was edible. And they shaped a giant shit, like a giant poo. And they were like, "Mom, look, I've made a poo." But it's a cake. And I was like, "Oh, well, go on, eat the poo. And like, even though they made it, even though it was edible, they couldn't get their head around like eating it. It was still like, "Oh, do I want to eat this? Look what it looks like." And so their body had changed, their physiology had changed in their body, and their taste buds had changed and everything, just at the concept of what they were looking at. Right. Or it's the same as if you go and you're like, "Oh, I had the best dinner last night. I've got some leftovers, and I'm going to go and put it in the fridge." And like all day you're like, oh, you might be working away or doing whatever you're doing, and you're like, "I'm going to go and have that leftover food." And it's, you can taste it, and your stomach starts rumbling, and you're hungrier earlier than normal. And it's like you're having all of those follow-on effects. And then you go and you get the food out and you heat it up, and you enjoy it so much. But without even seeing it, without even looking at it, you're already creating this situation in your body. And this is what we're talking about a lot of now. Of course, some things, what happen when we start thinking about things that we want, like we're free inside these egg stories or poo stories or leftover lunch stories, leftover dinner stories for lunch. We're free, and we're just like having a bit of a play with it. And when you're having a bit of a play with it, there's no tension there. There's no having to make it happen. There's no force. And so what we start to do inside the work that we're doing here, like you'll recognize, you'll be like, "Oh, I've got to how this, like, this is what I want." And immediately your mind will go back to calculations of how you can do this, or maybe what went wrong in the past, or the fear of whether it's good enough, or the fear of whether you deserve it. There's a whole heap of things that can come into play. Sometimes they're conscious, sometimes they're unconscious, but what it does is it actually stops the flow of being completely in that visual, and supporting yourself to move as that person, like being that person, move as that person. And that's why we do, the belief work, and that's why we do the visioning work, and that's why, this program, this membership is set up this way for exactly that support, right?